On June 18, 2020, one of Europe's most celebrated technology companies told the world that it had lost 1.9 billion euros. Not lost as in a bad quarter. Not lost as in a failed bet on a new product. Lost as in, the money never existed in the first place. Within days, the CEO was arrested. The stock collapsed by 90%. Thousands of employees went to work not knowing if they still had jobs. And a company that regulators, banks, and governments had spent years celebrating as proof that Europe could compete with Silicon Valley, was gone. But here's what you need to understand before we go any further. The money wasn't the story. The cover-up was. Because at the center of this scandal was a machine. A machine specifically built to silence anyone who dared ask where the money was. And one man, a journalist with a laptop and a source he couldn't name, spent years standing in front of that machine while it tried to destroy him. This is the story of Wirecard, the biggest accounting fraud in German corporate history. And the question isn't just how they did it. The question is, why did the world let them? Wirecard was founded in Munich in 1999, right at the peak of the dot-com bubble. At first, it was nothing special, a small payments processor handling online transactions, the kind of company most people had never heard of. Its specialty, in those early years, was processing payments for online gambling and adult entertainment sites. Not exactly the kind of origin story that ends up on the cover of business magazines, but that changed. In the mid-2000s, the company pivoted. It began positioning itself as a full-service digital payments platform, a Fintech pioneer. It moved into banking, acquiring a German banking license in 2006. It expanded aggressively into Asia, and it found its figurehead. Markus Braun became CEO in 2002, and he transformed the public image of Wirecard entirely. Where the company had once been a niche processor for the internet's gray areas, Braun recast it as a visionary technology firm. Lean, global, disruptive. He wore black turtlenecks. He gave TED-style talks about the future of money. He spoke in the language of Silicon Valley. In a German corporate culture known for conservatism and caution, Markus Braun was something different. He was a prophet, and the world believed him. By 2018, Wirecard had replaced Commerzbank in the prestigious DAX 30, Germany's index of the 30 most valuable publicly traded companies. It was worth over 20 billion euros. Its stock had risen more than 2,000% in a decade. Analysts were calling it the next PayPal. Some were calling it better than PayPal. The German financial press celebrated it. Institutional investors poured money in. SoftBank invested $900 million. Deutsche Bank arranged financing. Politicians pointed to Wirecard as evidence of German innovation. And all the while, beneath that immaculate black turtleneck, the numbers were fake. Here is where the story gets darker, because the lies didn't start in 2020. They started years earlier. And someone noticed. His name was Dan McCrum, a journalist at the Financial Times based in London. In 2014, McCrum began receiving tips from people who had looked closely at Wirecard's numbers and couldn't make them add up. Revenues that seemed too good, margins that defied the industry, subsidiaries in obscure jurisdictions that appeared profitable in ways that no one could fully explain. McCrum did what journalists do. He started asking questions. What happened next tells you everything you need to know about how this scandal was allowed to run for so long. Wirecard didn't answer the questions. They hired lawyers. They hired private investigators. They hired a firm with ties to intelligence services to dig into McCrum's personal life, his sources, his communications. They accused him, publicly, of working with short sellers to manipulate the stock price. They claimed he was part of a conspiracy to destroy a legitimate company for profit. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that should make you deeply uncomfortable, is that it worked. For years, it worked. The German financial regulator, BaFin, did not investigate Wirecard. Instead, in February 2019, BaFin took the extraordinary step of banning short selling of Wirecard stock, a move that effectively punished the people betting against the company rather than investigating the company itself. It was one of the most aggressive regulatory interventions on behalf of a private company in modern German history. While Dan McCrum was being investigated like a criminal, Wirecard was being protected like a national asset. And that's the question that should be sitting with you right now. If a journalist in London could see the problems, why couldn't the people whose job it was to protect investors? We'll come back to that. By 2019, The FT had published a series of detailed reports, the Singapore Files, documenting specific allegations of accounting fraud at Wirecard's Asian operations. The company's response was to commission an independent review by KPMG, and when KPMG delivered its report in April 2020, it couldn't verify large portions of Wirecard's revenue, not because the revenue didn't exist, Wirecard claimed, but because the third-party companies holding the cash wouldn't cooperate with auditors. Think about that. For years, Ernst & Young, one of the world's largest and most prestigious audit firms, had signed off on Wirecard's accounts. They had certified billions in revenue. And when asked to verify the existence of 1.9 billion euros in cash held in accounts in the Philippines, EY accepted a document as proof. That document was a forgery. Now let's talk about how the fraud actually worked, because the mechanics are important. And honestly, they're remarkable in their audacity. The core of Wirecard's fraud was built around something called third-party acquiring. This is a legitimate part of the payments industry. Companies sometimes route transactions through third-party processors in markets where they don't have direct banking relationships. Wirecard used this to its advantage. The company claimed that a significant portion of its revenue came from these third-party partners. Companies operating in the Philippines, Dubai, and Singapore. These partners were supposedly processing payments on Wirecard's behalf and holding large cash balances in escrow accounts. The problem was that these third-party partners were essentially fictional. Or more precisely, they were real companies with real addresses and real websites, but the business activity attributed to them was invented. The revenues flowing through them on paper did not reflect real transactions, and the 1.9 billion euros in cash they were supposedly holding in 2 Philippine banks did not exist. The Philippine banks later stated publicly that they had no such accounts. So how did this pass an audit? The answer is almost too simple. Someone provided falsified bank confirmation letters, a document saying that the money was there. EY accepted the document without independently confirming the account directly with the bank. For years, the enablers were everywhere. Auditors who didn't look hard enough, regulators who looked the other way, banks that underwrote debt based on inflated valuations, analysts who had financial incentives to maintain buy ratings, a financial press that, outside of the FT, largely accepted the company's narrative, and at the center of all of it, a man who had built a persona so convincing, so aligned with what people wanted to believe about the future of European tech, that questioning him felt almost impolite. Markus Braun had made himself too important to fail. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know this isn't the first time we've covered a story where the fraud ran not just because of the people committing it, but because of the systems designed to catch it that simply chose not to look. And if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button because this is exactly what we do. Now. June 2020. It could not be hidden anymore. On June 17th, EY declined to sign off on Wirecard's 2019 accounts. For the first time in the company's history, the auditors said no. They could not verify the existence of the 1.9 billion euros in those Philippine escrow accounts. The accounts, they had now been told by the banks themselves, did not exist. The next day, Wirecard issued a statement. The money was missing, or more precisely, there were indications that spurious cash balances, in the amount of 1.9 billion euros may not exist. The stock dropped 62% that day. By the end of the week, it had lost 90% of its value, 20 billion euros in market capitalization, gone. On June 19th, On June 19th, Markus Braun resigned as CEO. On June 22nd, Wirecard filed for insolvency. On June 23rd, Markus Braun was arrested. Each of those dates is one day apart. The speed of the collapse, once the first domino fell, was total. But here's the detail that makes this story something else entirely. The detail that was teased at the start of this video and that you need to hear now. The chief operating officer of Wirecard, a man named John Marszalek, was also supposed to be arrested. Marszalek was, by most accounts, the operational architect of the fraud. He ran the Asian business. He managed the third-party partner network. He was the man who, sources later alleged, had maintained contacts with Russian and Austrian intelligence services and had used Wirecard's corporate infrastructure as cover for activities that went far beyond payments processing. Marszalek was tipped off. He fled. First to Belarus, using a private plane. Then, it's believed, deeper east, allegedly to Russia, where he has never been found. He is on Europol's most wanted list. As of today, he has not been extradited, he has not been tried, he has not been seen. The COO of a DAX-listed German company, a company audited by EY, regulated by BaFin, praised by politicians, vanished. And the suspicion that the disappearance was facilitated, that someone with resources and connections made sure he got out, has never been fully resolved. That is not a corporate scandal. That is something else entirely. So, where did the wreckage land? Markus Braun stood trial in Germany beginning in late 2022. The trial, one of the most complex in German legal history, involved hundreds of thousands of documents and multiple defendants. He has denied being the architect of the fraud, claiming he too was deceived by colleagues. The proceedings have stretched on for years. The investors, institutional funds, pension funds, retail investors who had trusted the DAX brand, lost billions. The employees of Wirecard, most of whom knew nothing of the fraud, lost their jobs overnight. EY, the auditing firm that signed off on Wirecard's accounts for over a decade, faced enormous scrutiny but, crucially, faced no criminal charges. They paid no meaningful financial penalty relative to the scale of the failure. BaFin, the German regulator that had banned short selling and investigated journalists rather than the company itself, faced parliamentary investigation and leadership changes, but the systemic failures that enabled Wirecard continued to be debated rather than resolved, and Dan McCrum, the journalist who had spent years being surveilled, smeared and discredited, won the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting in 2021. He and his FT colleagues had been right about everything, and it cost them years of their professional lives just to prove it. The 1.9 billion euros, it's never been recovered. Nobody knows for certain where it went. Some of it may never have existed at all. The rest may be in accounts that have never been identified, moved through jurisdictions designed specifically to prevent that kind of transparency. The Wirecard story is not really about accounting fraud. It's about what happens when a company becomes a symbol. When a business stops being evaluated on its actual performance and starts being protected because it represents something people want to believe in. Germany wanted to believe it had a homegrown tech giant. Investors wanted to believe the growth was real. Regulators wanted to believe the auditors were doing their jobs. And so, everyone, at every level of a system designed to prevent exactly this, found reasons not to look too closely. The fraud survived not because it was technically sophisticated. The forgeries, in retrospect, were not elaborate. It survived because the human systems around it had every incentive to believe, and no appetite for the disruption that doubt would cause. Ask yourself, how many companies right now are being celebrated in exactly the same way Wirecard was in 2017? How many are in indices, backed by sovereign wealth funds, praised in the press, audited by the same 4 firms that audit everyone, and how closely is anyone actually looking? The lesson of Wirecard is not that one company was fraudulent. The lesson is that the system can be captured, that the people paid to catch fraud can be too closely tied to the companies they monitor, that regulators can be weaponized against truth-tellers, that a man with the right persona in the right place at the right cultural moment can build a lie worth 20 billion euros and the world will protect it. They didn't just steal money, they got a government regulator to go after the journalist exposing them. If that doesn't concern you, you haven't been paying attention. If this video made you think about what you trust, who you trust, and why, share it with someone who needs to see it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to the Boardroom Files. Every week, we go inside the companies and the people that shaped, and sometimes shattered, the modern world. The next one is coming, and I promise you, it's worse than this.
This is the Boardroom Files, where empires rise, scandals break, and the truth is always in the fine print.